Frank Castle, aka The Punisher, is a Marvel Comics character that was first introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 129 that was published in February 1974. Originally conceived as a villain, the character quickly became a fan favourite, so Marvel's writers soon shifted their approach to the character, making him more of an anti-hero than a villain. As originally depicted, Frank Castle is a Marine Corps veteran of the Vietnam War, and he adopts the persona of the Punisher following the murders of his wife and children at the hands of the mob. The Punisher becomes a vigilante who wages a one-man war on organised crime. He is known for his trademark skull motif worn on his chest, and his brutally violent tactics made him something of an anomaly among the other Marvel comic characters of the period. I became a Punisher fan in my early teens when I began reading the Marvel comic, jumping in with issue 24 when I found it at my local comic shop. My entry into the world of Punisher comics also coincided with the release of the 1989 Punisher film starring Dolph Lundgren in the title role. And while this film is far from perfect, it became something of a guilty pleasure for me, as I frequently re-watched the movie once I acquired it on home video. Given my enthusiasm for this character, I have long wanted to add the ultimate Marvel Legends Punisher action figure to my collection, but Hasbro certainly haven't made that easy, so in today's video I'm going to settle my score with the Punisher.
Here is justice, here is punishment, here in me.
When the Punisher was first introduced in the 1970s, comic readers had rarely seen a character quite this dark before, but by the late 80s he sat comfortably alongside other pop culture anti-heroes, such as Snake Plissken, Mad Max and John Rambo. And the Punisher would reach the height of his popularity during this time, with no less than 4 different monthly comic publications being found on store shelves, including The Punisher, Punisher Warzone, The Punisher War Journal and Punisher Armory. The Punisher is a very problematic character, and I've always found it somewhat difficult to openly admit to being a fan, and I always feel as though I have to add the caveat that I became a fan during my teenage years. Because if the Punisher was a hero I admired and wanted to emulate in childhood, I probably would have grown up to be a very twisted individual. Frank Castle's choices have turned him into a violent murderer, and while the Punisher may only target criminals, he becomes the exact thing that he hates. And when you distill the character down, he is no better than the villains he punishes. In the 1980s, the Punisher mirrored many social issues being expressed in American entertainment throughout the past decade. Frank Castle was one part of response to the urban crime waves plaguing big US cities that films like Dirty Harry and Death Wish had dealt with, as well as the disillusionment of Vietnam veterans in normal society, which had countless films and television shows made about that very prominent issue. But these concepts are now outdated, much like the idea of ninjas in the G.I. Joe universe, and this is why I feel the character does not translate well in the modern day. Have you ever had a friend that you feel like you have to make excuses for before you introduce them to another group? Like, don't get offended by Gary when you first meet him, he just has a weird sense of humour. Well, that's how I feel about the Punisher's appeal. Frank Castle's story is the ultimate revenge fantasy, but I like to think that's all it is, a fantasy, and that if I found myself in the same situation I wouldn't follow his path, instead choosing to become a force for change in my community, rather than someone who perpetuates the violence that created the situation in the first place. Despite my conflicted feelings towards the Punisher, he remains an 80s icon. He had a beat-em-up arcade game, and a Dolph Lundgren film co-starring Lou Gossett Jr. That alone makes him essential for my display case. Whatever people feel about the character now in retrospect is irrelevant. Around 18 months ago I found myself looking around for the ultimate Marvel Legends Punisher figure to add to my collection, and after adding several examples, I find myself as confused about the figures as I am about the character. And that is because Hasbro consistently gets their Punisher figures 80 to 90% of the way there, and then they fumble the ball at the 5-yard line with a bungled decision that stops the figure from being the perfect representation of the character. And in that respect, Hasbro's attempts at making Punisher action figures mirror Hollywood's attempts to make movies based on this antiquated character. I'm well aware that the Marvel Legends line includes far more Punisher figures than the 3 I have here, but I was not interested in picking up anything more than about 6 years old, because the advancements in articulation and digital face printing that have come around during that time have made any figures produced before 2015 almost obsolete. I'm also not a fan of the Punisher wearing a trench coat, because this is the most impractical piece of clothing to ever wear into combat. Nor am I a fan of the Jon Bernthal depiction of the character. And I know that's a very unpopular opinion, and while I do think that Jon Bernthal is probably the best actor to ever play the Punisher, He only gets the character 80% of the way there, just like Hasbro does. Because for me, he doesn't possess the hulking physical frame that Frank Castle has in the comic books, and the actor's average physicality makes it hard for me to believe that he can single-handedly dispatch an entire cell block of goons. With these self-imposed restrictions placed upon my Punishing collecting criteria, I have been limited to only acquiring these 3 Punisher figures, and the first one I'm going to discuss is this Walgreens exclusive, Jim Lee inspired comic Punisher from 2016. The figure's white boots, gloves and chest emblem contrast starkly against the rest of the navy blue costume, and this is the same style of outfit that the Punisher wore in that first comic issue that I ever read. This figure also comes with some of the best weapons ever made for the Marvel Legends line, and while I can do without the white coloured shotgun, the rocket launcher and M60 machine gun are really well done, and I appreciate the paintwork on the leather look belt and shoulder harness, the latter of which even features grenades and shotgun shells. Out of the box, the figure has a clean shaven face sculpt and white headband, and this is pretty decent. However, Hasbro have provided an alternate head that is supposed to look like it has a 5 o'clock shadow, but it looks more like Frank has been enjoying too much cake. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid figure, and I love the fact that this Punisher is heavily armed, but there remains a single boneheaded idea that prevents this figure from being perfect. And that is the lack of trigger finger hands. This figure comes with 3 different firearms and not a single hand that can pull a trigger. But hey, what should I expect from a company that gives all their Jedi Knight figures trigger finger hands when they never need them? It's just a stupid decision, much like Warner Brothers' decision to not have Dolph Lundgren wear the infamous skull logo on his chest in the 1989 film. Next up, we have this Marvel 80th Anniversary Punisher action figure, and there are some good design choices here, coupled with a number of issues. For example, I really like the head sculpt that features the skull painted on the face. It's probably the best Punisher head sculpt created for Marvel Legends. But the alternate head has painted details that are supposed to make the Punisher look like he has tired eyes and a stubble, but it ends up looking like he's wearing makeup. The weapons are also disappointing, with the sniper rifle lacking detail, and the figure comes with a pistol accessory, even though he has a holstered pistol on his belt that is not removable. Finally, we have the M4 assault rifle with an underslung grenade launcher, and it frustrates the hell out of me when toy designers create these rifles with the buttstocks collapsed. Buttstocks are retracted for parachuting and for storage, but the rest of the time you need to have the buttstock extended as it offers the best ergonomic design for firing. And soldiers and operators always zero their rifles on the range with the buttstock extended. If I ever see people carrying an M4 in the field with the buttstock retracted, I know I'm looking at an amateur. Finally, we have the Marvel Legends Punisher figure with motorcycle that was released in 2020, and this is a really great figure. I feel as though the designers nailed Frank Castle's physique here. The figure is tall and imposing, with a muscular upper body, and I love the pinless elbows. It's just a shame they didn't offer us pinless knees as well. This version of the Punisher has a receding hairline, and we are given a clean face and an alternate head with battle damage, and both of these sculpts are very well done. The motorcycle is nice too, and while we have seen this before in the Marvel Legends line, the all-black colour scheme and the extended handlebars give this a unique look that I really appreciate. The figure comes with a Viking-style helmet that is nicely detailed with good paint apps, and this Punisher also comes with a bunch of well-made weapon accessories. And while I enjoy the Uzi submachine gun and the sawn-off shotgun, and the machete and the baseball bat, these aren't the weapons I would have chosen for the character. Because for me, my Ultimate Punisher figure needs to be heavily armed. Also, the lack of storage options on the motorcycle is very frustrating, because when Frank is riding this Roadhog, he has nowhere to stow his firearms. While I do think this is probably the best Marvel Legends Punisher figure created so far, the choice of weaponry here prevents this from being the Ultimate Punisher action figure. So, much like the character of Frank Castle, I've taken matters into my own hands to create what I think is the best version of the Punisher, and I've created this look by borrowing different elements from the other figures I've already discussed. I used the body of the 2020 Punisher figure and added the painted face head sculpt from the 80th anniversary figure. I gave him the chest harness and M60 from the 2016 comic version of the figure, while also keeping the shotgun and the machete from the 2020 version. And finally, I added a pistol belt and drop leg knife sheath from the Valorverse Action Force toy line, to give this figure the heavily armed look that I've always wanted for the Punisher figure that would eventually grace my display. I'm very pleased with the finished look that I've achieved here, and this is very close to being my ultimate 6-inch scale Punisher action figure. But that is just my personal preference, and I'm sure each of you watching this video who are Punisher fans and action figure collectors have probably got your own idea of what the ultimate Punisher action figure should look like. So by all means, you can borrow my ideas or come up with your own unique interpretations of the figure, and I'd love to see them. And if you have created your own 6-inch scaled custom Punisher action figure, then please share the images on the Analog Toys Facebook page or on our Patreon community tab. Now, which of these figures do I think is the best straight out of the box? Well, that's easy. It's actually this Walgreens exclusive Jigsaw figure. Jigsaw is the Punisher's main antagonist in the comics, and while this figure doesn't have pinless joints and it does reuse a lot of weapon accessories, the head sculpt is just incredible, and I adore the look of the off-white suit with the black undershirt. I feel the best way to create the ultimate Punisher action figure would be for Hasbro to release a deluxe version with tons of different weapons and gear and multiple head swap options. Because I think that every fan has their own idea of what the ultimate Punisher figure should look like. And that's because the character has been around for so long and has seen so many different interpretations that we all have a different Punisher that we're most excited about. Frank Castle is a relic of 80s crime-ridden America. He is a character that was born out of the era he was created in, but he is so closely tied to the zeitgeist of the time. It's the reason why so many modern reimaginings fail, and why Hasbro continues to fall short in their attempts to make the ultimate Punisher action figure. But by making this video and creating this custom figure, at least I feel I've finally settled my score with Marvel's Punisher. So thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, you can click the links up here to view some of our other Marvel Legends content, or consider joining us on Patreon, where as soon as you sign up you'll get access to hundreds of exclusive posts, including video messages and behind the scenes photos. I'm Tony from Analog Toys, and I'll see you when the next video gets punished.